Hello, everyone. This is the ninth session of a series of conversations with Miki Kashtan, based on her article series she has been writing since April as a response to coronavirus and our response to it. And each article is dedicated to one area of life. And following the article, we hold a conversation with Miki to expand the topic more, to go deeper with that. And if you want to read the articles and also watch the previous interviews, you can find them on the fearlessheart.org website, on Miki's website. So I'd like to start with my question now. So Miki, in your ninth article in the series, which is called Finding Collective Wisdom to Move into a Future for All, you are talking how the decisions that have global impacts are made on the world at this moment. And I haven't made any quotations before in the interviews, but this time I want to make it. And the quote from your article goes like, over the last century in particular, progressively fewer people make progressively more decisions with progressively declining access to wisdom, all while the decisions made have progressively larger impacts. I think this is a painfully clear, accurate, and concise description of the current situation of our world in the hands of centralized use of power. And I'm aware that when we say centralized use of power or decision making, it might be hard for many of us to grasp or engage with, because democracy offers us the delusional image or the experience of collective decision making. So can you make two things more visible for us? One is the difference between democracy and making our decisions collectively for the whole. And the other one is how you see the patriarchy and the use of resources to be the core underlying cause of centralized decision making, as you suggest in your article.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just so we know you're asking two questions, not one, but that's all right. So first of all, I need to uncouple democracy from electoral process. There is a confusion because a certain form of government has become synonymous with what people think of as democracy, without remembering what democracy actually means, what the word means, and the gap between what the word means and the processes that we now have. So democracy means rule of the people. Rule of the people isn't the same as individuals choosing amongst a selection of options predetermined by others about who will represent them, subsequent to which they have no participation in the decision itself. So the electoral process has two problems. One is only individuals are participating. So there's a center like a hub, and there's all the millions and millions and billions of individuals that are all relating to that hub, not to each other, not to the whole. The hub becomes equated with care for the whole, but it isn't. Even the designers of these systems kind of know that the hub is not care for the whole. If they trusted that it was going to be care for the whole, they wouldn't have to create this elaborate system of checks and balances. Because if you trusted that the person in charge actually acts on care for the whole, you wouldn't need to limit that person's power. I was going to say his power because that's what it has been. You wouldn't need to limit that person's power by having other entities that constrain it. It's only because there's a recognition that the system as designed is based on people with personal interest having a lot of access to power. So that's one problem relating directly to an entity in the center. And the other problem is that what people are engaging in isn't really the decisions themselves, only the decision about who amongst the select few is going to do the actual decisions. I will contrast it with a process that is different from the electoral process, and that is the process of participatory budgeting, which has been happening in many places in the world and for a while was gaining clout and influence. It started, as far as I know, in the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil. It's a city of 1.5 million people. So that's not a country like India or China with billion plus people. And still, 1.5 million is not like a little village. And the process of participatory budgeting invites people, anyone who wants to participate in deliberation about the proposed budget. And through that deliberation, making choices. So A, they participate in the actual decision, not in selecting who will make it. And B, and this is critical for the question of collective wisdom and care for the whole, they deliberate with each other. They don't just think their thoughts and then put something in a box that is just from them. And so, and this bears out, the results bear out the point that I'm making, although there's a tragic ending to the story. But for as long as these were going on, there were up to 50,000 people engaging in these processes. That's a high degree of engagement when you think about the level of involvement necessary, because you have to go to meetings, talk with other people, read the budget, think about it. Not that many people would want to do that, but anyone can. And the results, because it's a deliberative process and not basically a disempowered process of putting a vote in something, over the years that this program was going on, health measures improved, sanitation improved, education improved, and most significantly, the index of inequality went down, meaning the gap between the highest earners and the smallest earners shrank over the course of the program's life. Now, if that is not amazing, then I don't know what is. The tragic ending is that the program has been discontinued. And I don't know the details of how this happened, but as far as I can tell, it's subsequent to Bolsonaro getting into power. So I'm wondering if this feels to you like it answers the first part of your question. Do you have any follow-up or anything you want?
Just a thought, I can see how in electoral process, you know, how mistrust is embedded into the design of the system. And in the other example you gave, how like basically interconnectedness is embedded into the design of the system. Yeah. It's amazing to see this, you know, in such a high contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there are many other processes that exist that don't require everyone to participate, such as random sampling, multi-stakeholder panels, things of this nature that are explained within the piece. But fundamentally, it's about bringing people together to think collectively rather than to think individually. That is where wisdom happens, because on my own, I think just about my own needs and perspectives and worldview. and it's unlimited. I don't see the others involved, the other perspectives, all the impacts. I don't see them. I can't. I'm just one individual. But if there are a number of us and there's enough diversity, then the impacts, the reality of limited resources, all of that, we impinge on each other in generative and productive ways. And we shift. Oh, I didn't know that, da, 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 da. Now that I know this, I am going to think differently. I'm not going to be overpowered. I will just shift, not compromise, shift. It's an entirely different animal. So how that relates to the question of patriarchy. Patriarchy is born of mistrust. Its birth ground is mistrust in the processes of life. When you lose trust in the processes of life, the only logical thing to do is to control whatever happens and make it as useful for you personally as possible. That is what we would all do under conditions of threat that leave us to think that we can't get our needs met. So instead of that happening only during an emergency or calamity or whatever, it's like Rina told us, there's an earthquake now in India. And, you know, a calamity would do two things. One is it would bring many individuals to agitation and caring only for themselves. And second is it would bring many individuals to come together and try to attend to the emergency. But what happens if the emergency continues, if it becomes something that happens over years, not just a one-time event? Eventually it gets worn out. The conditions of not enough for everyone persist, and you just can't have containers large enough for the level of trauma. And then some people begin to control others. Once you control and you accumulate resources within that control, your stake in the decisions grows and grows. And you want to make sure that the decisions will be in your favor. So there is more and more incentive to control other people, not just resources directly, but other people who may interfere with your ability to control resources for your own benefit. That is why, if you look at the history of humanity since patriarchy and empire started, you will see it's not linear, nothing is linear, but it's very close to linear. More and more resources are in the hands of fewer and fewer people. Things become progressively more centralized. Now there are people who are talking about a global government, which is not the same as global governance. A global government would mean that 7.8 billion people will have just one entity that controls all of them. So that's how I see the link with patriarchy. Wondering if you have any follow-up or if this resonates or anything else that you want to say.
Yeah, it makes the connection very clear, and it brings so much sense. Thank you.
And so much sadness.
Sadness, yeah.
Yeah, it's so painful to see how simple it could be and how we keep choosing collectively the one that isn't simple, that is so costly. Yeah.
Miki, you mentioned in your article, you mentioned about wisdom people actually have, and principles which this wisdom is based on, like enoughness and collective processes. I would like to know more about this wisdom principle and processes, which actually take us to maintain sustainability over a long period.
Mm-hmm.
And yes,
Yeah.
this is my question.
Yeah. I will start with saying something about the second piece. Many years ago, somebody responded to a blog post of mine, somebody I don't know, but I like quoting him. He said, "I may be the smartest person around, but I'm not smarter than all of us together." And I just thought that really nailed it. It was so beautiful. So I think that, you have the story of the elephant and the blind people. You know, that story that each blind people were asked to describe an elephant, and each of them touched another part of the elephant and described the elephant differently. But the elephant is actually all of those things together. So it's a story that captures the reality. And I spoke about this just now before in terms of mutual influencing, that all traditional ancient indigenous cultures are aware that we are stronger together than individually. It is only modern societies that are requiring individual strength as the ultimate measure and authority of everything. So, I'm a quote from a Native American person who described a circle process. He said, the circle process is where you have a talking stick or something like this that goes around the circle and each person speaks. And this man said, "We talk until there's nothing left but the truth." It's another very beautiful statement that captures for me the fact that it's beyond us individually to know what to do. It emerges from togetherness. Now, why is that? Because it relates back to enoughness, but through humility. I was just saying that patriarchy is loss of trust in life. Another way that I could define patriarchy is as hubris. Hubris is a word that comes from Greek tragedy. The Greek plays, the tragic Greek plays, have this concept of hubris, which is essentially the experience of humans thinking that they are above the rules of the gods. Now, the gods is not what I'm particularly interested in here. It's more that experience of being above the rules of life, of nature, of whatever. And what I mean by above them is not recognizing our limits. Like we have no limits, we're not limited, we can do whatever we want, we can think whatever we want. That hubris is still running patriarchy. It's showing up now, for example, in the belief that technology, which is what brought us to here, is what will solve the problems that it itself created. And there are many other examples of hubris. I'm not going to go into them because this is, just like one short interview. Fundamentally, humility is one of the qualities that I want to continue to increase in me in order to be able to engage with other perspectives, other places, other points of view, other needs, other concerns that don't come organically through me. The more of them we integrate together, the more we are actually holding the whole in processes that orient towards the whole rather than towards me and what is of benefit to me. The related notion of enoughness, that enoughness is the entryway into trust. I don't believe that we can actually restore the flow of life without taking a leap into trust. And again, going back to, ancient wisdom, indigenous cultures, the fundamental wisdom there is if everyone takes only what they need, not more and not less, there will be enough for everyone. The moment you lose trust in that, moment you lose trust in that process, you will either take more than you need because you're afraid of not having enough, or take less than you need because you've been trained to sacrifice yourself, which female training around the world is designed to do that. Not only female training, but overwhelmingly, that is what women are trained to do. In the book Braiding Sweetgrass, there is a beautiful botanical scientific experiment that shows the principle that if you take less than you need, it's not the optimal outcome. So they did an experiment with 3 plots of land with the same vegetation. In one, they harvested, this is sweetgrass, that's where the name of the book came from. In one, they harvested according to traditional indigenous methods. In one, they harvested, however much was available. And in one, they didn't harvest at all. And many people thought that the plot that wasn't harvested would do the best, but it's actually the plot that was harvested according to the traditional methods that did the best. Because in harvesting some, they made room for what was left behind to thrive, whereas not harvesting at all created competition between the plants that were there, and so they didn't thrive. So there is, in this story, co-evolution between humans and plants. The mutual influencing isn't just within the human species, it's also between humans and other forms of life. It's a really deeply orchestrated, but not consciously designed process that brings together everything. And so when we do this well, there's sustainability forever. When I think I said this in the article, I no longer remember, that when the white settlers came to California, they found just like extraordinary abundance with cultivation, but no soil cultivation. It was all within what existed. They could not understand how that could be done without tilling and destroying the land. So the tilling, the process of tilling, is trying to get more from the earth than is there to give. It's the beginning of what we're doing now, of harvesting from the resources of future generations. We are now living, I think, on 1.6 or 1.7 Earths. I think sometime in August is what is called, I can't remember the name of it, where all the days after that through the end of the year, we are actually consuming resources that cannot be regenerated. So that's why enoughness, recognizing the logic of enoughness and the processes of enoughness is essential for sustainability. In parentheses, enoughness and capitalism in particular are entirely incompatible, because the principle of capitalism is the principle of more. And more is not sustainable. Is there more, or did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm so impressed, and also I am sad that we lost the connection with this wisdom. Thank you.
I'll pick up from where we left with the more concentration of power. Like there is more as well. More and more power to decide is concentrated in one body and makes decisions for the whole. And we actually, like the most recent example during the COVID pandemic, we've seen several examples of it, and the one that came up to me today was seeing domestic workers from Sudan being left in front of the embassy, kind of abandoned there. Like, this is one impact. And there has been several, a lot of school kids in New York being dependent on meals in school, such like these impacts made visible by COVID. And I'm also thinking like how kind of numbing to seeing these impacts, because this has been the norm, the pattern that we've been deciding things in this way. Mm-hmm. And coming back to like, if we were to choose otherwise, especially during this pandemic, what would we see? Like, mm-hmm. any,
yeah. First of all, the story about the domestic workers. When you say they were left in front of the embassy, could you say by whom? Who left them there?
So the bit I witnessed was they were the people who were employing them put them all their belongings and abandoned them in front of the embassy and just left. And they were stranded there for quite a while.
In which country are you talking about?
I cannot remember it actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that it matters. It's more just like holding the grief.
Yeah.
I like to localize it. When I hold grief, I have like a picture of the globe and I put the grief somewhere, and this just like remains in the abstract.
Yeah, it was somewhere in this region. I remember that. Not sure which country it was.
So first, I just want to see and absorb the degree of separation that this story points to. That the people employing the domestic workers are human beings like all of us. The domestic workers are human beings like all of us. We can see that, but the employers of the domestic workers clearly somewhere in them separated their existence from that of the domestic workers sufficiently to just put them there. It's what had to have happened to people to be able to find the willingness to do that, even under desperate conditions. It's devastating to think of that it's not just like a central entity doing it, but it's a series of individuals doing it. And it brings me back to that reality also, that individuals are not strong enough or capable enough to engage with systemic problems. Each person tried to solve their own problem individually without looking at the impact both individually and systemically. So then I'm thinking, what would be an alternative? So before getting there, I want to just go on a little tangent, which is all over the world, locally, there are hundreds, maybe probably thousands of stories of communities locally finding ways to create resource flow locally, where the people who had more figured out ways to give it to the people who were in more need. Sure, there were also stories of other things, but this exists. In other words, the human family knows how to deal with it. Ultimately, the problems start from local solutions. I only want to go to regional, multi-regional and global when the capacity is not there locally to solve it. It does happen. Right? A lot of problems can be solved locally. How do I know that? Humans lived only locally for most of our existence. So we were equipped to do this. Now, I still want to go into your example and imagine who would be the entity that would address these problems, specifically with these domestic workers. So the way that I would think about it is, who are the people who have a stake in this solution, in finding a solution? It's the employers, because I have to believe, and I will believe, that it was hard for them to do it. Even though they did it, that it was hard for them to do it. If there was a solution that wouldn't result in this, they would prefer it to one where they abandon the individuals. So they have a stake in the solution. The workers, the domestic workers, have a stake in the solution. Who else does? Let's think. Do you have thoughts about who else would have a stake in the solution?
I'm immediately thinking of their families, which are overseas, in other countries. And I mean, I also want to think of, like, if there is that government that has...
Okay, so then as the government, I don't see it as my role. If we start from where we are and try to think about steps, I would, let's say that I am the government, someone in the government, I wouldn't see it as my role to make the decision. I would see it as my role to initiate the process through which the decision would be made. And that process would be some way of bringing together the involved parties and whoever else may have wisdom, knowledge, resources, care, etc. And then once those people are together, whether it's everyone or representatives, there could be any number of processes. I'm not getting into the technicality of how you do it. But once they are together, then all the needs are on the table and are held together. All the impacts that have already happened and thinking through the impacts that could happen can be on the table. All the available resources can be on the table. And you then apply the principles of enoughness and mutual influencing and come up with the best optimal solution, which would mean moving resources to where the need is with the least impact possible. There's no perfect solution to this problem, but there is the best solution that can be arrived at through collective wisdom. Is that tangible enough to imagine?
Yes, and I'm imagining this in the context of, because those people making that decision is actually like a domino effect. Other decisions were made in other places where they had a stake but not a say, and that impact kind of came down all the way to that. And I'm thinking, like, even in those conditions, if this is made possible, yeah, we can still care for the impacts.
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Just a comment before the question. It means a lot to me to have this space because of the earthquake possibility, we are all in one small space near the door so that if required, we run out. And that's why the sounds are around. Otherwise, I would have been in another space which would have been quiet. So I just wanted you all to know that. And yeah, it's amazing how much your writing and these explorations mean to me, for me to be here. And my question is, you know, in COVID times, what I have experienced in my hometown and now in this small rural part of the Himalayas in Dharamshala, that there is a sense of oneness that has emerged from experiencing COVID over a long period. We didn't imagine it to last so long, and now it has. So all the possibilities that you're talking about are 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 evident, like in small pockets. And I believe there are many small pockets.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering, and I'm hopeful, but I'm wondering, how can we show this to the world? Are you in the West or wherever you are able to see this? And how do I show this? To inspire, to bring it up as an emerging reality. I wouldn't say solution. It's a reality. It's a shift.
Yeah, first of all, I'm not surprised because in the global South, the period of time since knowledge of interconnection is being undermined is shorter in some ways, not universally in all the ways. It's not like India wasn't a patriarchal society before the British came, but it's still not all patriarchies are equal. And contrary to what is believed, capitalism and colonialism haven't necessarily been an anti-patriarchy move. In some places, the introduction of Western modes has improved conditions, for example, for women. And in other places, it has actually made it worse for women, including in Europe itself. Prior to capitalism, women had more power than within capitalism. And people don't think of it because there's this idea of linear progress. We're going from the backward primitive to the forward. And societies in which, and I imagine India was and still to some extent is such a society, societies in which women had their own separate sphere, in which they have a lot of say in what they do and what unfolds in the family and in the community.
Yes.
In such societies, the introduction of capitalism often moves the power of women downward.
Mm-hmm.
So with that bubble, I want to say that some elements have stayed within your society. So it doesn't surprise me that when there is danger, when there's constraints, it comes up, because it comes up everywhere. You know, there's a book by Rebecca Solnit called A Paradise Made in Hell, that documents situations in which very serious external breakdowns resulted in communities coming together and being able to create movement and build things together. So it doesn't surprise me that it happens, especially under conditions of COVID, that people are coming together.
Yes.
As to your actual question, you are asking me something that is in my weak area. You may notice that I haven't actually become, mass media celebrity. I don't know how to make the knowledge that we rely on here available on a larger scale. And I think the question that Verena is going to ask is going to speak to that too. But it also doesn't mean that what you're doing and what you see goes down the drain and doesn't have an impact. I have this faith that it registers somewhere, that those stories exist, means that other people then have a stronger sense of possibility, even if it's only a few people. I don't actually know. I'm wondering what you have tried, what you have done to make things known.
Really, I mean, I have I show up in conversations in the middle of the night or wherever, whenever. One is that. And two is, I think, having access to English and also having exposure to the diversity and the richness of the context. My voice is not only my voice, it is the voice of a larger circle.
Yeah.
And I think that is the difference, that there is patriarchy all over the world. But along with patriarchy, if there is interdependence or interconnectedness, then we are able to speak for a larger
Yeah.
slice of society.
And
I
I
think,
have noticed it when you come here to the conversations that we have here. You bring that voice with you, and it, you know, so whatever influence these conversations have, you're part of creating it.
yeah, that's my hope and purpose.
Thank you.
Thank you for this. Yes.
Okay, so I sent your piece, Miki, to somebody who is involved in participatory decision-making processes, broadly speaking, and here's their response. And I'm interested to hear what you would say to them in response to their response. I read Miki's piece with real interest. Where a struggle is the apparent global reach of her plan. In a sense, her inability to persuade people to get on board with it tells its own sad story. I cannot envisage how, realistically, Miki's idea would take root, even if it's the only way to save us. I could, however, see the idea fitting more into a small country's ambitions with the right people on board.
Yeah, and the question, and what do I think about that?
What would you say to this person?
I would say first that I'm glad that they are willing to entertain the possibility that this may be the only way to save us. I want to stand in the vision first before going into the reality of what is or isn't possible, to just stand in the vision. Because if we clip our wings before we even envision, then there's no chance. You know, that which, it's not like everything that is dreamed can actually happen, but something that isn't dreamed is guaranteed not to happen. So that's one simple piece. Second piece is, you know, there's a concept that I've learned in the last couple of years called adjacent possible. Meaning once you have a vision from where you are, what is actually possible to do that is close enough to where you are that there is a chance, and yet it is in the direction of the vision. If this person has the access and connections to the right people being on board, wherever this person is, experimenting with the processes that are part of the global governance proposal, experimenting them can happen at any scale. A village can experiment with them. There is a town in England called Frome that is experimenting with some of these principles, and they are having remarkable results, where the people who are the city council are not associated with the party. And they bring people together in a variety of ways, and they know the principle that conversations among diverse groups of people need to be facilitated is completely integrated into their plan. And it's been going on for quite a number of years. And now, you know, it's being looked at in other places, and people are wanting to try to copy it. Anybody who wants to look it up can go to Flatback Democracy is the name of the package that they work with. And the town name is Frome, but it's written F-R-O-M-E. So it is possible to experiment at any size. I also believe that getting people on board within a country is not that much easier than getting people on board to do a global process. Doing it on a very small scale is easy enough. And I don't know if that will be enough to sway people who are sitting in positions of power. I lack knowledge of what actually would sway people who have current access to resources and power. But I'm completely on board. I don't have any sense of being apart from this person in thinking is either global or not at all. Wherever, in whatever form, anything of this can be experimented with, it increases the field of its influence, and maybe eventually it will stick somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, there are two things that come to my mind that could be also an element of answer. The first one is that in the letter that you've reproduced in your blog, which would be the invitation to the people who would form the first advisory board, you are actually calling on people who already have moral authority globally, not just in a country, and you know, people, figures who are known by so many people globally and have reached that legit moral authority. So that's one thing, is that if there were enough of that kind of people who would buy into the process, there is a chance that they can, through their own context, you know, find the right people, etc. So that's one dimension. And the other one is that one of the key principles on which the model is formed is that it needs to work for the poorest and the richest.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's present in your piece so much, but you were really strong on that when you built it, when you put it together. And my sense is that if it can convince people who have, you know, the kind of wealth that would be necessary and the influence and the power would necessary to play with the idea at least, then there's obviously more chance that it can become global. And my sense is that particularly with COVID, everybody, even the wealthiest, have been deeply shaken by what is unfolding. And I think there is actually a real opportunity just now to reach out to the most influential people and say, look, we're all completely in a mess. How about trying something else? And alongside, that's the other interesting thing, is that you've thought about how to implement this model alongside all the power, the current power structures.
Yeah, it doesn't require the existing power structures to dismantle themselves. I secretly or not so secretly, I would say, I think if it goes on for enough years, it would happen organically, that the existing power structures would lose the raison d'etre for their existence. They won't be necessary. They will become irrelevant, not like overthrown, but they can become irrelevant if a true globally participatory process gets installed. Why would they then be the need? Because resources are produced locally, in some place locally, and then they're moved from there to places of control. But if they're produced locally and not moved, if local, this is why Gandhi was so intent on Swaraj, I think, and which is like local rule, and why the weaving, the spinning, which many people see as a quaint, small factor, is so central to his plan, because if everybody actually took up spinning as he suggested, they would lose their dependence on the British Empire. And by that act itself would change the course of history. So there are principles that are very potent if they get activated. I know that I can describe and talk about them. I'm not the person that knows how to activate them. So this is where I surrender to my own limits. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, hi, Mickey. So my question, I want to just say that I read your article and it was stimulating for me intellectually. It moved me emotionally, and I just feel very grateful for your work.
Thank you.
I want to say that. So my question is, in reading your article, it seems like patriarchy is set up to for us to have a real loss in our collective and individual capacity, or a diminishment of it. And to me, I get the image of like humans as blind sheep almost, and so and also like it reminds me of how you talk about privilege is hidden from the people who have the privilege. It's like masked or disguised, so we can't really see it. And what I'm curious about is how can we help people to, as I'm educating myself and learning, how can we help others see this phenomena of what patriarchy does and how it limits individual and collective capacity. How can we shine the light, help them recognize it, see it in a way that isn't threatening, that may cause people to feel overwhelmed or flee. And so the essence of my question is really getting it to the heart of like, I want people to see what's happening without in a way that's digestible. And I'm curious what you can offer.
First of all, I want to say that the internalization of scarcity, separation, and powerlessness is very, very, very deep. It goes really, really deep. And I would be in hubris to think like, okay, Noor, here's how we do it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to be in awe of the depth of the multiple phenomena that represents patriarchy. And I saw it, this particular challenge, at a time, like 20 something years ago, when I was in a community that wasn't really a community. It's what we call community now. People coming together once a week to have conversations about a topic of interest is called the community. When there's no shared anything, there's no commitment, there's no engagement on the material plane. So but there was a lot of affinity and coherence and alignment, so we kept going. This was after 2 years of meeting on a weekly basis, that group. And then somebody brought up the idea of sharing resources, like things like lawnmower. I'm talking about simple things, sharing resources. And this actually happened in 2 different groups, so I think it wasn't an accident. The first reaction was fear. Everybody, not everybody, but most people were responding to the proposal from the angle of what they would lose rather than from the angle of what they would gain. Now, it's so mystifying to me because here I am, now I have access to all these resources that everyone else has, not only to what I have, but what I think of is like, oh my God, my lawnmower, somebody will take it, I won't have it. That is the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened is the community disintegrated. And because this happened in 2 places, I think the connection is not accidental. I think, I never investigated it, but my intuition is that it kind of like brought the lie to us calling ourselves a community. If we can't actually translate our emotional, intellectual, spiritual, political, whatever alignment into something that happens on the material plane we kind of understood that we weren't really a community and there was no real point, no real purpose in continuing. This experience is part of what is now putting me so much on the path of creating shared risk communities rather than communities of affinity. Meaning creating the conditions that force us, quote unquote, to engage with each other to solve our problems together on the material plane, not just getting advice from each other and then each of us individually then applying the advice yes or no and having our own individual life, but actually throwing ourselves together to address our individual problems within a context that is no longer individual. What happens organically in where Rina is and what happens organically on a temporary basis when there is an emergency like COVID, where so many communities around the world, including in the global north, have come together to address problems. This won't stick once the particular, that's my prediction, it won't stick once the particular challenge disappears unless there is an actual tying of people's fortunes and life circumstances together. So this is not in the abstract, but unrelated to how to talk to people about it. I'm in the moment talking to you and other people who are already interested in this. If you're thinking, if you are one of the people who want to be ambassadors, I tried to be an ambassador and failed. I'm not fit for this. Other people will have to be ambassadors. If you're one of them, you need to find stories and specific hooks that become interesting for people. Here's a small one that I know to do, but it's not enough. The small one is you ask people to reflect on a time when they gave something to someone or did something for someone without any expectation of ever getting anything back. They just did it because the need was there and they felt the call to respond to the need. Ask them to reflect on a memory. And you could even ask them to close their eyes as they do it. And you will see a certain smile coming on many people's faces. There is uncontrollable pleasure, unhideable pleasure in the experience of giving without receiving. That is a pathway that I would want to know how to strengthen people's capacity. You know, there's a movie, a general Hollywood movie that I think has some of that quality. I don't remember what it's called, but you can probably find it if you look for it, which is the story of a man who was given the task to say yes to everything that he's being asked. And how his life completely changed as a result, how he came to be a different person from just saying yes to everything that he was being asked. It's an immense challenge for a person in a capitalist, individualistic environment where basically we are buying the privilege of exiting relationship. That is the fundamental goodie that capitalism offers, is I can exit relationship if I have money. I can buy the things that I need without ever having to rely on other people. Sure, I'm relying on other people, but I mask it because having money means I have the power to indirectly force other people to produce or do what will serve my needs. And it even looks fair and equitable to me. I'm paying. I'm not really taking anything away from anyone. So that's an example of something. It's like I would be looking for places where the joy of interdependence can be apparent.
Mm.
And try to build those pathways for people through practices, through exercises, through activities, through retreats, through whatever you would do.
Oh, yeah, what's coming to me, Mickey, is I'm not sure a very direct, like penetrative approach is the best way, because I think just feeling it in my own body, like, because it's so many layers to process, to just
Yeah.
digest myself. It's overwhelming. It's just so overwhelming to hold all of it. And so I can imagine if I'm wanting to be an ambassador and educate as something that I do, that I can, because I've seen some people come on your calls and leave. I've included some of my friends, and I think that's what happens for them. I think that they just, it's like, this is too threatening to my reality. I can't, moral dissonance, too much, blah, blah, overload, bye. And it's like, I'm wanting to figure out how to bridge that gap. And I think
So you do your own calls for the people that you want to do the calls for. And you do it your way instead of hoping for them to be influenced by me. Not everyone is. I really am not for everyone.
Okay.
You came, it touched you, it's hooked for you somewhere. Great. If you want to be an ambassador, you will have to do it on your terms, not on my terms.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the question I have sort of bounces off of what Noor asked. With another part of the structures that were sort of put in place in the 18th century, liberal democracy, and noticing today that in the US, a liberal democracy, we're very attached to individual rights and civil liberties. And even people that I work with that are fighting for social justice, they're still very attached to those. And they're enshrined in our Constitution. And so when I imagine a shift to a more collaborative decision-making model that focuses on needs and care and collective well-being, I'm imagining that people are going to see that as a loss, that they're going to have to give up their individual rights and their individual liberties.
Mm-hmm.
So again, so sort of like what Noor was asking, what might we say to someone expressing these concerns?
So I don't want to answer that piece. I want to speak about the more existential part of your question, because I don't have more to say about that than I already said to Noor. I want to look at the significance of the attachment to individual liberties and all of that. So in the move from need to right, we're talking about human rights, civil rights. If we inquire into that, the move from needs to rights is a move from collaboration, interdependence, togetherness, to an adversarial, competitive fight mode. Because what does it mean? What does it actually mean that I have a right to something? I have a right to something means I can claim the monopoly of violence that the state has to protect me from you. That's what it actually means. Otherwise, what is the currency of right? It means my need has precedence over everything else because I have a right to it. I lean on something other than my wisdom, our relationship, collective assessment of needs and capacity. All of that goes out the window. I have a right. There is in the language itself, it's language that is rooted in separation. So reclaiming the language of needs will require a major transformation. I personally don't believe that the individual liberties that we have been, what's the word? Trained to believe are necessary for our well-being, I don't believe their degree is consistent with long-term sustainability. That doesn't mean I don't want freedom and autonomy for individual. It's just that I don't think that individual liberties and rights are the correct pathway to have freedom, because I actually believe we are less free when all we can rely on is our individual rights. We have more freedom within a web of relationships to mobilize resources wisely. You know, in the piece, I was saying that I think it's in this piece that we are using resources less wisely. We're consuming so much, but I don't have any sense that we're actually happier. And in fact, you know, there is a kind of an enoughness point that has been researched that, you know, when you have fewer resources than that, you're going to be unhappy. You're not going to be more happy if you have more resources than that. And this is true both individually and collectively. It's true for countries are measured in the same way. So I think it's in a similar way that when we bring wisdom to resource sharing, then more of us will actually have well-being. And equating individual liberties with well-being is a conceptual error that is rooted in fear. Basically, we lost the trust, we lost access to interdependence, we lost access to direct access to resources, and the comfort, you know, being able to convert money for anything, individual liberties, all of these things are sold to us as the goods, the consolation prize for all that we have lost. I don't know how else to name it other than the loss is huge. It's so huge that we can't touch it. So we attach to the substitute that is given to us. Yeah, so I think the pathway to transforming this is the pathway of vision, envisioning a world that works for all. So for example, to go back to Viren's question, this person is saying, even if it's the only thing that could save us, if it's the only thing that could save us, then why not align everything with it rather than thinking, well, it's not realistic? Then what are you saying? Are you saying that you are accepting that we are doomed? That's, if this is the only thing that could save us, then anything else means we're doomed. I'm not even saying it's the only thing that could save us. I'm giving it as an example of something that could move us into a future. So I want collective holding of vision and collective mourning of how far we are from there until we find the actual pathways. Thank you all.
Thank you.